Hello, and welcome back to our series where we are building a people and culture management system, or a PCM. This series is brought to you by Prairie HR Solutions. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie HR Solutions. And in this video, I want to carry on where we left off. I wasn't going to have y'all sit here and watch me create all these object pieces manually. But to get you caught up, what we did was we created a variable called LEIDs, stands for element IDs, and we put every ID that we had in our HTML form here inside this array. Then we created a blank object and then used forEach to go through every element and then get the value and then store that into an object. So it comes to us as like rec imp ID colon and then whatever the value there is, comma, rec last name, and so on. So it's coming to us as an array, and then we took that entire array and sent it over to our Google Apps Script side, our client, or excuse me, our server side, to this push record, and then we passed that over to it. And then, of course, we cleared our action select to make sure that we see that it works. And when we go over here to our main, this is the part that I stopped the video on. We come to this push record functions that's receiving this records. And then what we did is we declared a variable called row, and this variable is in an array because remember, this is coming to us as an object. So we have to turn it into an array. And how we can do that is by saying records rec imp ID, and then this will produce the value of whatever that is. Same with this, and so on. Now we have to have the records first because it's an object, and then we have to drill down into that object to the rec last name, and then that will produce that value. And then we did it 79 times. If you're following along with it and did this yourself, I know it is incredibly painful. And this is just one of many ways to do this. And we'll go over a different way because this does take up a lot of real estate. And the more you type something over and over, the more chances you have of making a mistake. So if you were to say run this and nothing was to happen, then that means that there's a comma misplaced, a misspelling, either on this page or on this page. Perhaps an ID isn't the same or whatnot. So there's a lot of room to make silly little typos and mistakes that will keep your entire functionality from running. So if we were to, or once we got this done, excuse me, not quite finished yet, my apologies. Once we had this array in here, then we simply went to the sheet, which is our employee data, tab, and then appended the last row with all of this. So if we were to go over to our page here, now instead of putting actual data in here, I simply just put numbers just to ensure that functionality happens. And what I like to do is when I have a lot of fields like this, right smack in the middle somewhere, I will then put FLSA annual pay. I'll put the title of what the field actually is. That way I can check alignment when it's populated. So let's come down here. As you can see, we have 79 fields right now. And let's do create record and then process it. Now, if everything is typed correctly and it can run through the code on the HTML side anyway, this should disappear. So it helps you narrow down where an error is depending on what's happening. So let's go ahead and process that. Okay, it went away. Wow, am I going to get this first try? Let's see. We'll come over here to our spreadsheet here and we'll scroll down and see if it did populate it. So now what we can do is go and ensure that everything is aligned. So what we should do is scroll over here and see annual pay is salary. Probably just change this to annual pay. And then our pay type is here, pay cycle. Yep. Hourly, bi-weekly, monthly, and then it should continue on. And then we scroll all the way over here, and 79 is our last total share value. Okay, good. So everything is aligned. And one thing that when we're dealing with records, anybody in HR can tell you. In fact, everybody on this viewing this video should be able to say, well, wow, this is going to scare me because I don't know who's doing what inside this system and this spreadsheet. Isn't there a way that we can capture that? And yes, there is. So what we can do is you see that we have our employee number starting at 1. What we could simply do is add 2 columns here. And these 2 columns is we will put user and let's do record date. So now what we can do is we can populate the user email. Let's do the user email. And then the date that the record was actually created. And how we can do that is over here on our Google Apps Script side. So let's create a test function. I know I like my test functions. They're just so handy. And we already know how to get our user. So we can do let user equals, and then we call the session interface, and we want to get the active user, and then we want to get the email. And then that will give us the email. So what we can do is we can simply take this, bring it up here, and then after this function is called, the first thing it's going to do is grab this user. Now what we can do is simply pass this user right there. Now it's not dealing with anything in this records. We just want to populate it before we run into that records dot whatever. And we can do the same thing with a date. Now, Google Apps Script and JavaScript, they handle dates quite differently. And you'll run into this, especially when you're starting to think about time. So Google Apps Script and JavaScript doesn't think of time as months, days, years, whatever, hours, minutes. It doesn't think of it like that. What it does is it breaks it all the way down to milliseconds. And then dates, as you'll see here in a second, dates come in a variety of different ways. I mean, if you think about the world, if you're a global company, here in the US, we do month, day, year. Other places will do day, month, year, and then others start with the year. So our dates and times can come to us in many, many different formats. There's a way that we can get a current date timestamp, and let's just do this variable here. Let's just call it date, and we can gather the date by this. So let's log this out, this date out, and see how it's actually coming to us. So let's save this, and let's do test, and we'll run it. As you can see, this is how it's coming to us. So it's coming to us as the date, or the day of the week, the date, and then hours, minutes, seconds, time zone, year. So that's actually how it's being populated. Now there's things that we can do to this. So we can do new date dot, and then we could simply get a whole bunch of things, get milliseconds, get that. We could do to local date string, and then let's run it and then see how we get, because you don't want a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of stuff coming over to populate in that field. So if we were looking for a specific just month, day, year, we can do to local date string. Now, the other thing that we can do is the other options we can do is go down here to do to, and we can do to date string. We can do to local time string. And what local time string does is it produces the date as a time. So the other one that I wanted to show you for our other more maybe contractors, depending on what contracts you use, this is what's called Zulu time. So there's different ways that we can produce our date. And since we're simply wanting to catch the date and perhaps the time, what we can do is simply just do to local date string. Now what we can do is come up here and just copy this. And I mean, if you want all that information, you can definitely have it if you're dealing with somewhat of a large team and there's a lot of people in here doing a lot of things to records and you want to know the exact hour that they did such things, you would just simply erase this and you can get the whole piece. All depends on your situation. So we have the user. Let's go back over here to our sheet. Okay, so we have our user email needs to be first and then the date. So we can then take the date and add it right here. And now if we were to save this, now we're in the developer, so this may actually, we might actually luck out. What I did was this is the first column, this is the second column, and then it begins that. So let's go back over here to our form here, and I'm hoping that it will just let me, it'll pick up that code because it wasn't a substantial change. And we are in the developer piece. So now let's hit process and then go back over to our sheet here and see if it picked it up. Oh, good, it didn't. We didn't have to refresh it. So you see now we're picking up the Prairie HR Solutions and we're picking up our date that this record was created. So that's good. So now we can have a way to not only write data to a sheet, but also gather the email as well as the time it was recorded. So I'm going to actually show next, let's go revisit the massive amount of variable data and objects that we have coming to us and kind of look at a different way we can do that. So let's go back over here to our code. So you see that we have quite a bit of stuff here. And then on our operations page, we also have quite a bit. And this takes up a lot. And also, like we were mentioning, and I'm sure you've ran into, I've run into it numerous times when I do things like this. You leave yourself open to make errors and then the whole thing doesn't work. And then you got to go through and actually look at, okay, well, what is misspelled? Did I miss a comma? Something not have that. So there is a way. If you were thinking when you were doing this, you're like, my gosh, I wish there was just a way that I can go in and grab all these IDs and then take those IDs and then add them to an object. And luckily there is. And just like in HR, JavaScript follows the same thought of there's always an easier way to do something. And how we're going to do this is we are actually going to use something called query selector all. So we've been up to this point, we've been using this get element by ID, by the individual ID. Well, what we can do is if you notice the information that we're having is all coming from this input tag. So every one of our input tags should have or has our IDs in it. So we could actually just use query selector all inputs to get these. So how we can do that is, let's scroll back down here, and in this connect or create record, let's create ourselves a constant. We'll call that constant. Let's just call it inputs, because that's really kind of what it is. And what we're going to do is document dot query selector all is exactly how it looks. And what we're wanting to select is our input tag. So what this is going to do is this is going to go through every single input tag that we have on this sheet, because remember, this script is for our operations page HTML. Now, if we had this line of code in our home.js, it will then pull everything that home.js is connected to. So we don't want that. We just want to isolate it down to our page here. And then what we can do is a series of filtering and mapping. And we are going to use a constructor. We're going to create essentially this array from our inputs. So how we're going to do that is we are going to create another, spell it right. We'll create another variable, and let's call this variable LEIDs, since we're doing this piece down here. So let's call it LEIDs. Now this LEIDs, we are wanting to construct an array from this variable and then filter the IDs out and then map the IDs and then assign it to each, just essentially just filter it out, map it, and then we'll have an array and then array of this. And then we can use our forEach to assign the LEID values to each for these objects. So how we're going to do this is we are simply going to use an array constructor, capital ARRAY, and we are going to select from, and we want to select from inputs. Now what we're going to do first is we are going to filter that. And I'm going to use arrow notations to keep this clean. And what we're going to filter is the input. Now, it's not inputs, because that's this. I'm just going to say input. And this can be anything, but since we're getting the input from the inputs, then that's why we're calling it that. And what we want to run or filter by is the input ID. So this input is every single individual input tag. And what we're doing with every single input tag is we are filtering by the ID. And once we get that, we can continue the filter and chain a map to it. And what we're going to want to do with this map is take the input that's been filtered and pull out the input ID. So now let's actually let's do this to get rid of this real quick so it's not going to run. There we go. Okay, so let's actually, let's create an alert so you can see it, because I know if we did the console log where you went in to inspect and read the console, I know that may be new for people. So instead, let's just do an alert and have it pop up all of these inputs and see how it's going to be coming to us. So now you'll see that this is what we manually typed. Let's come back over here to our piece here and let's see if we get lucky and not have to refresh. Oh, we're going to have to refresh. Okay, so let's refresh this. Okay, let's go down here to operations. Records. Now we'll come down here to select our create record. We'll process it and here we go. Okay. So now if you can see when this alert pops up, I know you're not able to see it just by the way that I'm seeing it, but if you were following along and typing and creating your own here, you would see that this alert pops up and it has all of our IDs inside that array. So what we've essentially done was we created a 2-line piece of code that took care of all of this for us. So now what we can do is essentially we can get rid of all of this. And well, I'll leave this commented out just right now for reference. Once we do our final cleanup, I'll take care of it. But this way, we're not having to go up and pull out, okay, rec imp ID, copy and paste, or however you're doing it, typing it to where you had to do it 79 times. We've dynamically grabbed this whole thing with these 2 lines of code. So now if we were able to, let's get rid of this alert here. If we were able to essentially run this again, let's go back over here and then let's refresh this. Our code will still work the same exact way. So let's do 6, 8, 9, just numbers. And we'll come down here and create the record. We'll process it. Nope. That's why I didn't do anything. I didn't save it. Okay, so let's save that. Saving is a good thing. Okay, now we'll come back over here, refresh it. Operations, records. We'll do 6, 8, 9. Create record, process, that goes away. And then we can come over here to our sheet. And as you can see, it's grabbing our user email, our record date, and then 6, 8, 9. So it still works the same way. We just cleaned up that front piece. And I'm actually think I'm going to change this back to take away from the date local because it is nice to know the time and then we can reformat it here a little bit later. Okay, so we have this. That's awesome. So essentially we could just delete all of that. And that is what our create record function would now look like. So let's come over to our main because our main is a lot like this. So I'm going to delete this to local string. We'll just deal with the whole thing later. So now our Google Apps script side here, our server side, we have this record piece coming down, and this is our object. So essentially what we're having to do here is take this object and turn it into an array. And we are pulling out each and every single value based on the records and then that individual key. So this would be a value, this would be a value, that would be a value, so on. So we're seeing that this also takes up quite a bit, but there is a way that we could actually produce this same piece here. So let me comment this out. Since it's coming to us as an object, we can actually simply do, let's create that row again, row variable, since that's what we're using. We can simply do an object, which is an object constructor. And what we want to pull out of that object, we can pull out quite a few things. We can pull out the keys, we can pull out a name, the length, but what we're wanting is the values. We want to pull out the values per key. And if you remember, the result of this records ID rec stock price here is the value. So we can simply just grab records and pass it down here. And this will deconstruct, well, not deconstruct, it will essentially take the records object and turn it into this array, because we're pulling out and essentially breaking this object down to get only the values. So let me leave a comment here. Take object and make array of the values. Okay, so now let's save this. Now, if you kind of caught something, we're not actually using this user and date thing right now, because that's not coming over to us in the records. So we'll have to do something additionally, and we can kind of prepend, put something in the front of the objects, just like we did, not just, but in the same concept manner as we did with arrays. But for now, let's just save this, and then we'll come back over here to our sheet or our UI and refresh it. And let's go to operations, records. This employee ID, what we'll do to make sure that it's different, so we'll do employee ID, we'll just put exactly what it is in here. Okay, and now let's scroll down and create record, hit process, record goes away, so it sent it over to the Google Apps script side. Now, if we come over here, you'll see that it is being produced, and it's being produced in a way, it's still being produced over, but it's being produced in a way that not all the fields are full. So it's attempting to kind of compensate for that, it appears. But let me go ahead and log this out. So let's come back here to our code here. And instead of records being up here, let's create something French. Okay, we'll just leave that blank, and then we'll create a records variable. And this records variable, let me come over here and grab a object. Let's create our object. I don't have one available, but we can create one real quick. Let's do name Our name will be, let's do Jake Finger, and I'll do a quick little email. Email will be jf@example.com. And we'll do one more. Let's do age. And our age is, my age is going to be, how old did I say it was? 25? Yep, 25. So now we have this constructor here. So let's log this first out. We'll log records out. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this and put it down here into our test. That way we can run it without confusion here. And then what we'll do is we will then log out our row to see exactly how it's coming over as just records, and then what happens after we use our row. So let's run this. And as you can see, it's coming out backwards when it's being populated. It's reading as age 25, then it's reading my name, and then it's reading this. And then when we do this object value records, then it's producing Jake Finger JF 25. So there's something that we're going to have to do differently here to ensure that it is populating correctly over here. But I see that I'm already at 30 minutes. So I push myself to keep these somewhat bite-sized by 30 minutes. So I'm going to end this video here. And in the next video, what we will do is we will adjust our object.values piece here to ensure that it aligns inside our spreadsheet. But we do now have a way to populate or write our code in a way that does not contain all of this. We just simply now need to work on the alignment. Okay, so hope this has been helpful to you. If it has, please hit that subscribe button. And until next time, please take care.